Well, we're now looking at deductive reasoning. And deductive reasoning uses facts, rules, definitions, and other properties that lead us to logical conclusions. This is different from inductive reasoning, where inductive reasoning is looking for patterns. And one of the tools of deductive reasoning is the law of detachment. Now, the law of detachment would say that if P, then Q is a true statement. So if, do that in a different color, if P, then Q, if that's true, then, and P is true, well then Q must be true. Now that probably sounds like a little bit of gobbledygook. So why don't we look at a couple of examples. This is the law of detachment. If P then Q is true and P is true, then Q must be true. So we have a given statement here, and it says that if 3 points are non-collinear, they determine a plane. Now that actually is a true statement. If 3 points are non-collinear, they determine a plane. But let's evaluate this statement here. What is our hypothesis in this first statement right here? Well, 3 points are non-collinear. That would be our P. And that they determine a plane would be Q. Now, we're given this statement. It says points A, B, and C lie in plane G. Well, this is not a match to our hypothesis right here. Our hypothesis is that 3 points are non-collinear in our given statement. And then we're given a conclusion here to this. Points A, B, and C lie in plane G, and that is that points A, B, and C are non-collinear. And we have to be careful here on this one. We're asked to draw, asked to determine whether this is a valid conclusion. Well, the only way that it could be valid is that this statement here is equal to P, but that's not true. That's not what our hypothesis is. And so therefore, in this case, we can say that we've got an invalid conclusion. Now, why would that be? Let's go back up to here. While it is true, going back to the very first statement, that if 3 points are non-collinear, they determine a plane. That's a true statement. This second statement, A, B, and C lie in the plane. Well, does that mean they're non-collinear? Well, I don't know. They could be non-collinear, but they could also be collinear. They could all lie on the same line and still be in plane G. And so therefore, since this does not match my hypothesis of my original statement, I cannot make a valid conclusion. And one example of that is A, B, and C could be collinear to form a line. Now let's look at another one, see what we come up with here. So in this one, we've got a statement. If a student turns in a permission slip, then the student can go on a field trip. Well, what's our P? What's our hypothesis here? Well, if a student turns in a permission slip, that's our P, then they can go on a field trip, that's our Q. So if you turn in a permission slip, then you can go on a field trip. And then we're given this statement, Felipe turned in his permission slip. Well, that does match our P. And let's see what conclusion it brings, and we're going to determine whether that's valid. Well, the conclusion is that Felipe can go on the field trip. Well, that matches our Q. And so according to the law of detachment, this is a valid conclusion because in our conditional statement, our original conditional statement, we've got identification of the hypothesis, we've got identification of conclusion, and then what we're asked to evaluate does match our hypothesis, and the conclusion does match our conclusion, and therefore we can say that this is a valid conclusion based upon deductive reasoning and the law of detachment. Felipe has turned in his permission slip, so therefore he could go on the field trip. So you got to watch. You're given a statement. You want to identify from that original given statement, what's the hypothesis, what's the conclusion. Then you're given a second statement. Well, does that hypothesis match the hypothesis of the original statement? And if it does, and your conclusion matches, well, then you must have a valid statement. But if they do not match, like what we saw here in this first statement, then you've got an invalid conclusion. Law of detachment, deductive reasoning.